Hi everyone, welcome to another session of Living with SMA. I'm Emma Vogelmann, and tonight I'm going to be facilitating a really interesting discussion between Jack and Becca, all about how to get the most out of your care and your care budget. So let's start by getting to know our lovely panelists. Jack, can I get you to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name's Jack. I am 27. I've got SMA type 2. So I, related to this topic, I receive my budget through the social care. So I receive an individualized budget, which is an annual pool of money to use for my care needs. And I'm sure we'll go into a lot more detail as our discussions sort of continue.
Awesome, thank you. And Becca?
Yes, hi everyone, my name is Becca. I'm 21 and I'm funded by Health, so I have a continuing healthcare plan. I'm funded 24-hour care, and although I'm funded by Health, I receive my care through an outsourced company, so I don't have my own what's called a personal health budget. That money is kind of delegated to a company, and they help me employ my own carers, but we'll talk about that a bit more later.
Awesome, thank you very much. So you guys have sort of briefly mentioned what type of care you get, but can we ask a little bit in more detail about how your care plan, sort of how your budget works? So Becca, can I start with you?
Yeah, so like I say, so I'm funded 24-hour care. So the way I've kind of arranged my shifts is that I have 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. day shifts, and then 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. waking night shifts. So it was decided that I would have waking night shifts because of partly through the equipment I have overnight. So overnight I have a BiPAP, I have feed by my gastrostomy, and I have to be rolled at least every 4 hours. But if I'm ill, then I have to be rolled every 2 hours to help with chest infections and things. So it was decided quite quickly that I would have waking night shifts. And yeah, like I say, I am funded through a company. So I am with a company called Total Community Care. And basically I call all the shots. So I tell them exactly what I want to go in the advertisements. I interview the PAs that apply for the job, and I help with all the training and things. But I'm not technically the employer, the company are. And they do all of the things that take a lot of time. So they do all the payroll, they do all the rotas, things like that. I'm actually in the process of getting kind of my own personal health budget, which would mean that I kind of employ them myself and I am the employer, because I decided that now that I finished university, I kind of have more time, and I found there's certain limitations to employing a company. There's a lot more restrictions and things like that. So I feel like I'm prepared now and able to kind of employ my own carers. But when I started uni, I found that it would be best to have support in that, because I didn't feel able at 18 years old, when I was just moving away from home to go to uni, I didn't feel able to manage all of the care side of it as well. So that's just kind of a snapshot.
Awesome. I think that sounds really interesting that now you're making that transition to being the employer yourself. So we will definitely be asking you more about that. But Jack, can you tell us a little bit about your care package?
Yeah, sure. So my package is slightly different to Becca's. My package is a 14 hours per day, so that's 98 hours per week. So that is made up of a nominal 6 hours during the day, although no specific time slots for when those 6 hours take place, but a nominal 6 hours of care during the day plus 8 hours overnight. I did have a sleeping night package until a few years ago, and then I was informed that due to sort of recent legislation that they wouldn't accept sort of sleeping nights as a legal way of employing carers. So from then it had to be a minimum 8 hours overnight for care. So that's how I get my 14 hours per care. In terms of the employment, first, I am the employer of the carers, so I don't go through any agency. So I find the carers, I employ them myself. However, as part of my budget, my local council provide a firm of accountants who will sort out all the payroll. Although I pay them myself, I get the money, but the accountants will send over the pay slips and sort out the tax and all that sort of thing. But I'll do the payments. I did, when I went to university, similar to Becca, I had an agency to start with. Similar reasons that I thought it would be something else to worry about if a carer was sick or there were issues. So I started the agency. We got let down by the agency, and the agency we're using said they couldn't support my needs anymore. So at that point, we had no choice really to go alone. And since then, I've sort of been happy, sort of going at it alone. And again, I'm sure we can talk in more detail about pros and cons of agencies. I guess one other thing in terms of my care, the way that I've always done it was have a team of 2 carers. So I need 1 carer at a time, and then working alternate weeks or sort of 2 weeks at a time, 2 weeks off. And that's how we've operated. I'm not sure, Becca, if something similar or a different arrangement.
Yeah, so so did you say that you have 1 carer work for a whole week? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. No, so I do it quite differently to that. Mainly because I've never done it like that, and obviously I'm funded 24-hour care, so it wouldn't be kind of feasible to have somebody do a whole week. But when I was at university, I had some carers do kind of 24-hour or 48-hour shifts, which worked quite well. I mean, we started doing that because of shortages in PAs. It wasn't because I wanted to, it was kind of out of necessity. Because like I said, I am budgeted to have waking night shifts. But yeah, we started that and it worked quite well. So I actually, I'll talk a bit more about this later, but I actually have 2 carers that commute from where I was originally at university, and they do 48-hour shifts here, and my other carers do 12-hour shifts. Because the other carers, like I got on really well with them, and they really wanted to continue working with me. So I'm happy to have that combination. But no, I have a monthly rota, and yeah, I do a complete mix. So the carers do like random days, random nights. There's no kind of plan, because we found again that carers wanted, obviously not every carer wants to work every weekend. It's good to have a mix. And I found that if people worked too long shifts, I found they just got very tired. Again, I think maybe I require kind of more assistance because I have I guess gastrostomy and BiPAP and things like that. But I found that it wasn't possible to have carers do more than 2 days at a time because of how tired they got. And I felt like even if they didn't seem particularly tired, I would be conscious that I didn't want them to do too much, or I would kind of, if I wanted to do something, I'd wait until the next day because I'd be too worried that like they were tired and they needed to rest. So for me, I do a monthly rota, and ideally, depending on whether the care is a full-time or part-time, I have a team of around 5, maybe 6 carers. That equates to a full team. I have struggled with recruiting, which I'll talk about later. But yeah, an ideal team is between 5 and 6 people.
What's really interesting already is that, Jack, you mentioned that your sort of transition to direct payment wasn't because you chose to take on that responsibility at that time. It was sort of like you didn't have a choice. It was, that or sort of don't receive the right amount of care that you needed. But how did you find that transition from agency to being an employer? Was it scary or did you feel ready for it?
I think that the hardest difference between being an employer and going to an agency is actually finding the people. In terms of as I said, having the support of the accountants is really helpful. So I think payment can be complicated, but they provide me the pay slips, and then it's just sort of me doing the bank transfers on a weekly basis. I do occasionally get a bit behind, which I need to sort of be quite strict on myself of to try and keep up, because it can build up, trying to make sure so all the tax payments are correct and stuff. But the actual that side of it, I find okay. I think obviously finding people is the tough bit. Obviously with my two sort of two carers on, I've got two carers in my sort of team. I guess there's a bit of cover that if one person was ill for some reason, there is another person who can come in at short notice, but obviously there's not quite the same cover that a bigger team would provide. So I think that obviously is a risk. And in the past, in emergencies, I've had to use sort of online websites to sort of find carers who work, who can sort of cover last minute. The slight problem with that is on occasions I've had to use my own money rather than my care budget to pay for those. The reason being is because my care can only be used for PAYE, so where tax is paid at the same time, whereas a lot of these emergency cover carers are self-employed. So there was a restriction on my budget that it couldn't be used for people who are self-employed. I think probably with the concern that tax wasn't being paid correctly at the time. So on occasions, for short periods of time, I've had to use my money for care and haven't found a solution around that one yet. But again, that is rare occasions, and I think quite lucky. I've got the support of my parents as well for emergencies, where if carers can't cover, then I do have a backup option as well.
Absolutely. I think that's definitely a flaw in the system, that your budget, yeah, it can only be used for care, but they should be open to the fact that not everyone wants to be employed. A lot of people prefer to be self-employed, even as regular, care staff team. So no, that definitely sounds like it needs to change. But I'd be interested to know, Becca, from your side, like you said you had more time because you're not at uni anymore, but sort of what has made you feel ready to take on that extra responsibility?
Yeah, so I think I don't know, it's difficult. I mean, so I'm not with an agency, because people quite often get confused by that. So I'm with a care company. So where I was with an agency, I used to be with them up until I was 18, an agency. Whereas agencies would just send in people that you wouldn't really get a say in who they sent in and everything. This company, they have clients all over the UK, so I'm one of their clients. And they employ people specifically for those clients. So they put ads out specifically for me. And the people that are on my team only work for me. So it's quite different. And as a whole, I was happy with it at uni. We did have issues with care and like recruiting, but that was quite often, I think it was partly to do with the fact that I only hired young carers at uni. I didn't hire anybody sort of over the age of 30, because I wanted them to fit in with like the uni experience and my friends and things. So I think that was partly the issue. So obviously, like, younger people tend to have a higher turnover. I think another issue was probably to do with dual location. So I went to uni an hour and a half away from home. And because it was like just on the cusp of being like an okay amount to travel for like the periods that I came home and things, I didn't hire separate carers for uni and home. So the carers were all based in Winchester. And then when they went home for Christmas or whatever, they would move from 12-hour shifts to doing either 24 or 40-hour shifts, which the carers that I was with were really happy to do. But I think initially when you see it on an advertisement, you'd be a bit like, oh, I'm not sure I want to do that. So I think that might have been my issue. But yeah, my main reason for wanting to change was really to do with recruitment. I think the company, they're not specifically for people with kind of like our condition. They specialize in spinal cord injuries. And I think a lot of their clients are kind of like middle-aged with families. So I think their recruitment style is quite different to what would attract the carers that I'm kind of looking for. And so that's one of them. I feel like I would be able to find carers. I know everybody struggles with finding carers, but I feel like I'd maybe be able to do it better than they would, and certainly after I had that little bit of experience and over time and things. And secondly, it was kind of to do with time management. So I've recently got a full-time job, literally within the last month. And obviously beforehand, well, when I was at uni, obviously I only had like 12 hours of lectures a week, so it was quite easy to arrange appointments around it and things. But now working 9 to 5, like Monday to Friday, I obviously have very small windows where I can interview people and have meetings. And the company insists that someone from their side is attending all interviews and everything. And obviously when I only have like options of meeting in my lunch break, it's very difficult when they then say, actually, we can't do that. And it kind of pushes that time scale back. So I'm looking to do it myself because I think that I can get things done quicker. And I think that's really important. Sort of, I found a big issue in the sense that most carers obviously only have to give a month's notice when they leave. And I found it really, really difficult to then find somebody, employ them and train them within that month. And with me now working, I think that'll be even harder. So I think if I can do it myself, then that will be easier. I know that it will be difficult to adjust to, but I think, yeah, I think I understand the process more now. And yeah, I just think I'm ready. Like with the new job and everything, I'm hoping to move out on my own next year. And I think I just want that kind of independence to be kind of like across every part of my life.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna come on to recruitment in a second because I think that could almost be its own session. But so guys, you guys have both had experience sort of with different ways of providing care, but one of the questions that's come through from someone is, do you pay more for agency carers than PAs that you hire yourself? Which one of you wants to answer that one?
Yes. Well,
you go, you go.
Okay, sorry, Becca. So yes, in my experience, the agency was about double the cost of private employment, and obviously that's not out of my pocket where the money's going. However, from a social care budget perspective, all the local councils are in these circumstances are really short of money, and I think anywhere that they can save money, they will do. And I get the feeling that to some extent they appreciate the fact that I maybe moved on to a to private hiring, to private employment of carers rather than going through an agency, because it was about half the price per hour, and I think it helps in the sort of constant struggle to try and get the hours that you really need. So I also think it's a bit fair we're paying all this money to the carers, and then the actual amount that goes through to the people you're working on a day-to-day basis is sort of maybe half of what you're paying. So they definitely are more expensive agencies. I mean, obviously, you to some extent you get what you pay for. So we have talked about the downsides of not working with the agency, so the lack of cover potentially for carers when they're not there, and support in employing them. But I think it has. I think I'm sort of comfortable with hiring privately, and I think the cost difference is quite a big factor in it.
Definitely. Anything you want to add, Becca?
Yeah, so like Jack said, it was very similar. So my care company at the minute, they kind of take the same amount that my carers are paid hourly. So like Jack said, it's about double the price. The only thing I think is different, maybe because I'm funded by health, was that they were quite happy for me to go with a company. I don't know if it would have been the same with an agency. But we said when I started my transition when I was 18 that I wasn't happy to kind of employ people myself, and they were quite happy with that. That was fine with them. But the only issue was that they wanted whatever company I went with to be CQC regulated. So I know a lot of people that have employed carers with RSTUs for university. And my CHC, and I think it depends on kind of the council around it, because I don't think I've found anybody else that's had an issue with it actually, but my particular council wasn't happy for me to go with them because they're not CQC regulated, and they said because I'm funded by health, they needed somebody who was kind of had that health certificate. So yeah, they were quite happy to go with the company. But yeah, it is more expensive. And like I say, I think it is you get what you pay for, but I don't know. I only had a meeting with my CHC kind of manager like a few weeks ago, and I wasn't aware it was as much as like double. And they said that my carers actually get paid less than they would look at paying somebody who's kind of trained to the standard they are. Again, with my ventilator and my gastrostomy, my carers are paid £10.50 an hour. And they said that now I'm looking to transition. Obviously, the budget that they use would be decreased because of the fact they wouldn't be paying their company. So they said they would be happy to increase the carers' pay maybe to like £12 an hour, because they'd still be ultimately better off. So I think, yeah, it is sometimes you get what you pay for, but I think when I think about, am I really seeing the benefits of paying double? I know it's not me paying it, but it's taxpayers. Am I really seeing the benefit of paying double? And I'm not sure I am. So I think that's maybe one of the reasons that kind of swayed me when I was already thinking about it.
I think perhaps one other thing to think about is some agencies or care companies might have certain restrictions. So when I first was going to start university, the care company wanted to insist that I had 2 carers with me at one time for any manual transfer. And obviously that 2 things, it doubles the cost because you've got 2 carers, but also it gives you less flexibility because you need 2 people there at the same time. So I need to know when I want to do the manual transfer. So when we got around that, and it meant an assessment where someone from the company came to my university halls of residence and sort of observed it to make sure that it was safe for one person to perform it. I mean, I was quite confident that it was, and I'd be confident as a private employer hiring one person, knowing that they'd be safe working with me. But my standards may be different to a care company. That's also probably something just to bear in mind as well.
Yeah, I had a similar thing actually with going on holiday. So yeah, like I said, because I'm funded 24/7 care, last year I went on holiday not on my own but with a friend for the first time instead of family. So I needed to take a carer with me. And my care company insisted that I had to take 2 carers because of the fact that by the idea that I'm funded 24/7 care, that person would never be off duty. And I had quite lengthy meetings with them, kind of saying that, yes, I'm funded 24-hour care, but that's because of obviously I can't reach things like drinks and things. And if I were to choke I would need assistance, but I don't, they're not literally needed like 24/7. But it was quite difficult to kind of, obviously, you don't want to say, I don't need the care all the time, because then you're like, well, what if they kind of get rid of the care? So in the end, I did have to take 2 carers, because they just wouldn't budge, they insisted. And it was quite a lengthy process because the funding then had to go to panel. I'm not sure what panel, but it had to go to panel, to agree that I could obviously essentially be given double the care budget for 5 nights. It probably took about 2 months to go through, and they did give me the budget, which was great. But then, obviously, go on holiday, nobody pays for carers to go on holiday. They just pay for the hours they're working. So I was then paying for myself to fly, 2 carers to fly, and a separate room for them, which obviously increased my budget quite a bit. I was prepared to do that because I really wanted to go on holiday, but I love traveling and it's not really important to me. So I hope to travel a lot more in the future and to much further afield. So it won't always be possible for me to do that because of the sheer price. But again, when I had the meeting with my CHC manager, she said that they would be quite happy for me to go with 1 carer, as long as like we could prove that because my argument was that my friend would be with me during the day, but although she didn't do my care, she would pass me drinks and she would move my head, and things like that. So they said that as long as she was trained to whatever level, sorry, I'm gonna cough. Sorry, I did that out.
Take your time.
Yeah, they said that. Oh my god. So things like that. See, my friend could help me with that, but it's not necessarily needed to be a carer. Yeah, they said that they'd be happy, as long as I could prove that I kind of wouldn't be compromised in my safety, and the carers would still receive like downtime. So there's things like that which I had never considered, like with the agency and employing people myself, to like think about.
It's difficult because very similar to you, I have a really long shift, but it's really difficult to explain to people that there is all of that downtime in between. It's sort of more being on hand for when you need something rather than active for the whole 12-hour shift. So yeah, it's difficult to get that balance right between, stating that you could need help at any time, therefore that's why you need carers, but you don't need help all of the time. So this kind of brings me to a question that was submitted, and it says, can you tell us about your experience with care assessment, and would you say are the most important things to consider before the assessment? So, just our conversation just there about like how to articulate what your needs are. I think that it makes sense for us to tackle this toughie now. Jack, can I start with you?
Yeah, sure. I guess the age-old advice, which I've always heard with SMA UK growing up, is always present yourself on your worst day with the most amount of care that you'll ever really need, because obviously it's a lot better to have more care than you need than less care than you need. That goes without saying. So I think really thinking worst case scenario, what support could you need throughout the day and overnight, and asking for that. I think no one enjoys these sort of care assessments because you're really, it's sort of an hour of saying things you can't do and where you need support. So I think it's quite a negative generally experience, but I think in this instance, it's what you really have to do to really be honest about where you might need support to try and get what you need. The thing that I find most difficult is because these questions are not tailored to a young person with a physical disability who otherwise is having a very active lifestyle, because they ask you, for example, of your typical day, and that question is so difficult to answer. I think it's to the idea that you may want a couple of hours of care in the morning, a couple of hours of care at lunchtime, a couple of hours of care in the evening, and sort of that's it. So I think I've always tried to sort of argue against a typical day, and sort of just give ideas of activities throughout the week. I think a week is a much better sort of scope of, this is what my general activities are, this is where I need support. And then you can sort of carve that up into 7 portions of time. And then if you need more help one day than the other, because you want to go shopping one day, or you need to do laundry one day, or you need to clean the whole house, it sort of adds up over a week to the same amount of work that you sort of need and support you need from a PA, rather than sort of, because a typical day is not going shopping, because I don't go shopping every day in my life. It's not that luxurious, but it's I think that's sort of one way of sort of trying to cover everything that you might need while still making it as typical as possible.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, because in our previous session, you and me, Jack, we talked about workplace sort of challenges and things like that. And one of the things is, if you work part of your time in an office and part of your time at home, so which one is the typical day? So yeah, that is a really difficult question to answer. And I completely agree with you about how it can feel quite negative to talk about, well, on my worst day, I may have a coughing fit or a choking fit that could last 2 hours, whereas on a typical day, that doesn't really happen. So no, I completely see what you mean, but it's really important for people who are doing care assessments, or who are having care assessments done on them, I should say, to present that, because that's just going to prepare you for those bad days.
Yeah, and maybe a good example of where I've really needed it is because I generally don't need care overnight, to the extent that maybe once every couple of months I might need support overnight. So it's trying to think of good justification why I want someone there. So for my case, it's if there was a fire, I can't get out of bed, I need to be hoisted out of bed. It's absolutely necessary that someone's with me overnight, every night, even if most of the time I won't require them. And let's hope that fire is a worst case scenario rather than a typical day. But I think sometimes that's the only way that you can sort of justify the care which we rightly need and have the right to access.
Absolutely. Becca, what's your experience with care assessments?
Yeah, I was going to say the same as Jack. Obviously, present yourself in your worst. I think for me, and my mum was very heavily involved in my care assessment. We were very adamant from the start, even if we just said it together, not to the assessor straight away. We were very adamant that I needed 24/7 care. Obviously, especially going away to uni, but we were adamant that even if I wasn't, like, I can't do anything on my own. Like, I can't go anywhere on my own. And like Jack said, presenting yourself as in like the worst situation. So I have had like sudden choking fits where I aspirate and have to go to a hospital. And it's really depressing to kind of sit there and go, well, this might happen and I might die. And if I haven't got the help that I need, I could choke. And like, but the way, and I used to get really upset about it. But the way that we kind of tried to spin it on his head was that, well, if I present myself like this, it's going to give me the means to live how I want to live.
Exactly.
And for me, like, obviously, the care was obviously to do with safety and everything, but equally it was to do with living the way I wanted to live. Like, I was adamant that I didn't want sleeping nights, because if I wanted to go out to a club before COVID, and then I wanted to stay out as long as I wanted to. I didn't want to have to be worrying that, my carer was tired and she needed to go to bed. I would say that one of the main things that I was told was that we needed to say that my parents would not be prepared to do my care. We were told that obviously because at the time I lived with my parents and I would be within driving distance when I was at uni, we were told that they could kind of put it on us that, well, and before I turned 18, my mum did do a reasonable amount of my care, and we were told that they could put on us and say, well, if she's done the care up until now, like, why can't she continue doing it? So my mum categorically said, I will refuse to do her care, and if she is left without care, I will not help her. Which, and we had to have that conversation beforehand, because it sounds really harsh, and I know that my mum would always be there for me and she'd always help me, but it's those little things. I mean, people have said to me it's like buzzwords, like there's certain things you have to say to get the assessors to kind of listen and go, okay, yeah, that's needed. But yeah, I think it's about having that communication, and if somebody like your parents or your partner is going to help you in that assessment, then definitely discuss it like beforehand.
Yeah.
I was going to say something else and I can't think what it was. Oh, that's going to annoy me.
It'll come back to you, I'm sure. But I think that is it's a difficult one, and in a way, it, like you said, it sounds really harsh that, your parent has to say to someone, I'm not going to look after my daughter, if she's left without care. And obviously that's really difficult to say. But the thing that you mentioned was that the care allows you to live the life that you want to. And that's not someone, for any of us, who's tied to the hip to one of their parents. It's an independent person who is ambitious and wants to do all of these things with their lives that we have as much right to want to achieve, same as everyone else. So
yeah, and I think it goes both ways as well, because like, I know, for example, I have younger siblings, so yes, I live at home with my mum, and yes, she doesn't work, but she is a very busy person. Like, I have two younger siblings that she looks after. She has hobbies and she wants to kind of do a college course, like to maybe go back into work or something. And it's about, just because someone might be there, it doesn't mean that they're kind of like going to be able to help you all the time. And equally, yes, I know my mum would help me in emergencies, but she's not going to be there all the time to take me to clubs, and I wouldn't want that, and neither would she. So it's about living having the independence. Also, I remembered what I was going to say.
yeah.
So like Jack said about kind of the assessments being very standardized. I found that with health, that was definitely the case. So I don't know how it works with social, but with health, they go through different aspects. So I don't know, breathing, mobility, communication, whatever. They go through 7 different ones, I think. And based on your description for each one, they rank you from 1 to 5. And if whatever number you hit by the end of the time, that puts you in a certain category for the amount of care that you will get. Well, that assessment and the kind of numbering thing, turns out it was the exact same assessment that my, at the time, 85-year-old nan had when she had dementia, and they were working out, how many hours of domiciliary care she needed. So to have the same assessment is just bizarre to me, and it kind of echoes the fact that Jack was saying, it doesn't take into consideration what I might want to do or what, I don't know, I might need to do. It kind of just,
Yeah, it's just really bizarre that, you hear about on the score sheet for things like personal independence payments and stuff like that, but when it's determining your care hours, that is definitely strange. So one of the questions, which Becca, you've sort of already answered, but someone's written in and said, if I have support from family members, is this taken into account and will this affect my budget? So, Jack, you mentioned that your parents were sort of there as emergency backup. Like, did their support ever come into play in terms of your care budget?
Yeah, it did, and even so past when I was 18. So I went to university quite far away from home in Scotland. So I mean, no way that my parents weren't just around the corner to provide support when I needed it. So the assessment was sort of split into two. When I was at university, I was awarded budget based on the fact that I get no support whatsoever from anyone, and I received the it wasn't 24/7, but it was sort of, as I talked about before, maybe sort of about 14 hours a day, the care that I needed at the time. And then during out non-term times, the support from my parents was factored in to that. So they did sort of a calculation with the budget of sort of, say, 30 weeks of the year at university, 22 weeks not at university, and then sort of did the multiplications to work out what the budget would be. So certainly my parents' support did come into it. That being said, I may have been able to have argued more about not wanting to rely on my parents' support when I wasn't at university. And that was, I guess that wasn't a battle that I sort of wanted to do, but I could totally understand people who may say that now I've got this independence, that's what I want all the time. I think that's completely justified. I was, at that time, I was happy with that budget and it worked for me. But subsequently, as I found work away from home, away from Manchester, then that argument wasn't there anymore, and it was 52 weeks a year of the support that I needed.
Yeah, I think that you've sort of come onto a really important point, is that you sort of have to pick your battles and with these things. Like, for you, it didn't feel right to make that fight at that time. It just sort of evolved over time that you needed to make a case for that amount of support for you to be completely independent, but it has to be at the right time for you and the right time for your family. Like Becca, you said, before the assessment, if you're going to have family or friends or partners play a role in it, you need to have a conversation with them before you see what everyone's comfortable with, what do you ultimately want to achieve, and then go from there, I think.
Yeah, and I think I don't know, obviously, some people want their family to help them, and some people's family want that, and obviously it's everybody's individual decision. But I think again, from a health point of view, I was told that, not by them, but I was told by other people that if you start off with, I don't know, for argument's sake, saying that my parents would look after me when I wasn't at uni, it would be very difficult to argue a case then when you did want care outside of university, because I don't know if it's different in social. When you're funded by health, they very much look at it from a health aspect. So they very much look at kind of what medical issues do you have, what equipment do you have, and in the sense that if they would look at it as if, what if nothing has changed? Why do you need more care?
Yeah.
And for me, other than maybe arm weakness, no kind of medical aspects of my condition have changed since I was 18 and I'm now 21. So I think I would have had a very difficult time arguing that. So I would say to people, I would think very carefully about what you want with your future. It's not just about now, it's about kind of where you want to be in 3 or 5 or 10 years time, because it may be very difficult to then switch to the life that you want.
Yeah, I think that is very fair, and it's a good thing for people to bear in mind when they're doing their care assessments, is that possible struggle later on. So just having a look at what are the other questions that we've got. Now, we've already sort of touched on this, but one of these questions is it difficult to deal with the employment side of direct payments or a personal health budget? So, Jack, do you want to start, because you've been an employer for a little bit longer?
Yes, sure. So I think the actual employment side, I think, is manageable, particularly if you have a structure in place. So as I said, with accountants who my local council provide me with that support, payments and tax, it is manageable, and that's okay. The hardest thing is finding an employer. And I think Becca mentioned before that she was keen to get sort of young PAs with her at university, and likewise, especially when I was 18, I was looking really for young male carers to join me at university. And in the care industry, there aren't that many young male carers to find. So I think that's sort of the biggest challenge, is actual finding the people rather than the employment itself. And I think one thing just to note at that point is that compared to other employment, other jobs, you can be a lot more picky, I think, in terms of who you employ, and less have to be worried about discrimination of the kind. So if you're looking for a male or a female carer, potentially, that is something that is justified, and that will be accepted as a way of recruiting people. And I think you just got to sort of post adverts where you can. So there are different agencies you can use online, I guess. Some of the agencies, when I say agencies, I mean sort of, rather than the previous way of talking about agencies, but sort of hubs of sort of PAs looking for work.
Yeah.
But again, some of those you have to pay for to access. I believe other people have managed to get their sort of direct payments budget support to pay for those sort of agencies as well, to help them find to help them employ carers. Personally, I've sort of paid those fees myself, but that's just because I've not sort of bothered to go down the route of finding support. But I think sort of just trying to post adverts sort of wherever you can think of, really. Maybe local universities, people who just leave university and looking for work, the job centre, online agencies, just wherever you can, really, because they're really hard to find the right carer. So I think you've got to get as many feelers out there as you can to hopefully get some responses.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I've been asked this multiple times by people, and I'm sure you guys have as well. How do you find carers? And it's such a mixed bag, because you could have found one through Facebook that worked out really well, and then another one you could have, it could have been a referral from a friend, or there are just so many places that you could potentially find people. I wish that there was one like localized source that you could just go to, and it was magical powers just find you PAs. But Becca, what's your feeling sort of about to go into finding people yourself? Like how are you going to go about recruiting?
Yeah, so I mean that is like the main thing I'm concerned about, but realistically my company aren't great at it either. So in the sense that obviously I know where they advertise for people. I think my kind of thoughts are, if I'm looking for young people and I've recently been looking for a job, I'm gonna post in similar places to where I was looking. Like obviously I know it's different industries, but places like Indeed, Target Jobs, things like that. That's where kind of everybody looks for jobs. So I think that's where I'll be posting. And then things like Facebook. I personally I don't post on my private account, because I don't hire family friends or anything like that. That's just a personal choice. But there's loads and loads of kind of Facebook groups for your local community that are looking for jobs and things. And that's quite an easy way of doing it. Obviously, people can just private message you, and you can ask them to send their CV into you. So I think with social media now, it's kind of not easier because everyone seems to struggle with recruiting, but there's a lot more avenues that you can pursue.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think bearing in mind if you have a target age group, kind of bearing that in mind is important. You know, I don't know, if you were looking for kind of older carers, if that was your preference, like advertising in the newspaper might be more appropriate. I think it always just kind of depends on having your audience in mind. That would be my advice.
Yeah, that is a really interesting point, to be fair, which I hadn't thought of. You know, depending on what you're looking for in your carer. Because I mean, like you guys, I wanted a younger carer when I was at uni, and now don't really care. But yeah, that's really interesting to think of. You know, it's sort of like any other job market. You know, if there's an ad and they want a particular type of person, they're going to post in a particular place. That is a really good tip. So, what do you guys see as let's say, what are the top 3 advantages of having PAs? And by that, I think this person who's asked the question is more looking at like over agency carers. So, you know, PAs that you guys have chosen, interviewed, trained, and all of that. Who wants to go first?
Three advantages. I'll keep it nice and short. Cost, like personal like flexibility. I've got 2. Is 2 okay?
Yeah, 2 is
They're the two key ones.
What about you, Becca?
Good. No. Okay, so yeah, I'd say I don't know what the word is, like opportunities. Obviously, if you're employed for an agency, you don't really have the option of like picking who you employ and things like that. So I'd say kind of personal preference is a positive. Yeah, I think kind of consistency. Obviously, if we're talking about agency compared to employing yourself, when I used to be with an agency, all of my carers were on 0-hour contracts. So you know, there was no obligation for them to turn up. And people would come and go left, right, and centre. And you'd kind of be given people that I don't know, some people would have loads of experience in the industry and some would have none. You know, some we had lots of carers that came and we realised halfway through their shift that actually they didn't really understand English. So yeah, I think having kind of that consistency and that kind of I don't know, that it made me anxious not knowing kind of who was going to turn up, like what was going to happen. So I think reliability.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm gonna go with 2 too.
Yep, no, that's fine. That's just me being annoying, asking for 3. But I think one thing I wanted to, it's not a question that's been submitted, but one that I'd like to ask is in terms of agency and sort of not knowing who's going to turn up, essentially. I think for a lot of people with SMA, there's quite sort of specific training and specific skills that a PA would need to have, or like equipment that they'll need to know about. Did you guys ever find that to be an issue when working with agencies?
Yeah, I did find that a big issue. Again, this is before I was 18, so yeah, I mean, I had carers since I was 5, because I was on BiPAP overnight since I was 5. But yeah, 5 to 18, that was all through an agency. And yeah, I don't particularly remember. I mean, I assume they were given their mandatory training, like manual handling and things, but
Yeah.
I don't think they were ever given like clinical training on gastrostomies and BiPAPs, which I had since a very young age. It was my mum that trained them, you know, and in a way, I mean, at the minute, that's what I'm fighting for. To be fair, I'm fighting to be able to train the carers myself, because at the minute, with moving to a personal health budget, they're saying they need to be trained by clinical professionals. Obviously, it's like now me and my mum are really equipped to kind of train people, but when I was like, I don't know, like between 5 and 10, and even when I was 15 again, my siblings were very young then. And like, you know, we were just kind of getting used to everything ourselves. And also, if we're having to train people when they come in, it kind of defeats the point of having the carers. Obviously,
Yeah.
if you're training people knowing that like they are like contracted, they're going to stay with you, that's different, because you're training them with the incentive that, you know, next week they'll be up and running and they'll be able to kind of help you in the long run. But if you train someone and then a month later they leave, and you've got to start again, it's very difficult. So, yeah.
Yeah. Jack, do you have anything that you want to add?
I guess maybe slightly different from you, because I guess I don't sort of use maybe as much equipment as Becca, so there's probably fewer things to train for. I guess the big one for me is manual handling. And when they're with an agency, they said they went through manual handling training. I've got no idea really what that consists of, but you couldn't just say, I guess the problem is everyone's different. The way I hoist, I'm sure, is different to how the two of you like to be hoisted to some extent or other. So you're still going to have to teach them.
I think basic manual handling training literally means, from a point of view of a carer, like I think they're taught how not to strain their back and things like that. I don't think they often, I don't even know if they have to include hoisting, I'm not sure.
I believe at one point some of them may have to experience it in a hoist so they can sort of see the other side of the mirror, but I don't know how useful that is really, because we've all got our own quirks, and I think with hoisting I can sort of talk through in a sort of half an hour and then give it a few days, then I'll get the hang of it. And that's sort of the best training you can have. I guess I can't speak for any other sort of training required, but for me that's sort of sufficient.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one because everyone likes things done a certain way. Like, I'm sure between hoisting the three of us, we would all do it really differently, not just because of our physical needs being different, but like also our preferences, and you know, just things that we prefer. And yeah, so I think it's really a bonus when we're looking at what are the advantages of having a PA, is that you can customize your care and, you know, tell people exactly how you want things done so that you have that consistency in your day to day, which I think is really important. So I think we've gone through most of the questions. So a final question I have for the both of you is, what advice would you give to a young SMAer who is considering having PAs for the first time?
I don't know, I think, I don't know, growing up obviously I did have carers, so I didn't have to kind of experience that big jump. But I think I've seen a lot of people that are kind of very nervous about it, you know, if their parents have always done it, like what's going to happen if they, like, what if they don't do it right and things. But and obviously I know the process is difficult to get carers, but I would just say, like, you know, just go for it. Like, I think obviously what we said earlier about picking your battles, like I think having care is a battle to pick. Like, at the end of the day, personally, without my care, I wouldn't be able to do anything. And it's about your independence. It's about kind of saying that, look, I deserve to be able to do what everybody else is doing. And yeah, it may take a while. So, you know, if you want care, like, think about it, discuss it with your parents. Some parents are skeptical about it. So if you really want that care, then sit down with your parents and say, look, like, have an open conversation and say, I want to do this because I want this. How do you feel about it? I think it's important to have that communication, and it's important to see both angles. But at the end of the day, don't be swayed by what anybody else is saying. You know, if you want that care, you go for it. And if your assessor doesn't think you need as much as you think, then keep pushing. Like, if you want it, then like keep going, and eventually, hopefully, they'll see that you need it. And I think later in life you'll thank yourself so much for it, because it does. It means you can do whatever you want to do. So yeah.
Jack, what are your words of wisdom?
I think that was really good advice from Becca. I guess my other suggestion of advice would be never judge a carer after one night's worth of care. I've always dreaded sort of the first night with a new carer, because sort of getting used to a routine is awful. But I think it's crazy how quick someone gets used to your routine, and sort of give it a few days. Particularly, I think this links to Becca's point, because I think the first time, if you're relying on family care who know exactly what you need, without you even needing to ask for it sometimes, having to walk through step by step with a carer is really tiring, and probably a long time ago for me, but I imagine quite intimidating the first time. But give it a few days and it gets so much easier getting the support you need, and you'll just get into a routine really easily, as long as they're a good carer. But I think give them a few days, and and then it just gives you that independence that everyone's looking for. So
I completely agree with that. I think, even to this day, when friends of mine get a new carer, we're sort of like, oh, I hate having to train someone new. But you're right, they will get used to it, and you get used to each other, and you figure out a good way of working together. But it's also really important to normalize that feeling of anxiousness when you have a new person, because in a lot of our situations, we're literally trusting them with our lives. And, that's not to be trivialized. So, it's really important that communication is open. And like you said, Jack, you give them a chance to get used to you. Don't make snap judgments about, someone's suitability. Because honestly, some of the people that you think won't work out are some of the best carers. So I think it might be nice to end on like a nice little like story or anecdote or something. But I'll share mine while you guys sort of think about if there's anything you want to share. Is one of my PAs I have now, who's one of the best PAs that I've had. She actually didn't turn up to her interview when we scheduled it. And we've all had no shows, and they're really annoying. But this one, something in me wanted to message her and just sort of say something snarky, like, I take it you're not coming then. And I did that. And then she told me why she had totally forgotten, and she didn't, she just didn't remember that she had scheduled this interview. And it was because at another job that she worked at with troubled kids in care, she had been like almost assaulted the night before, and there were police involved and all that. So obviously she was really shaken up, and it just completely slipped her mind. And so I rescheduled the interview, which I've never done before, but I thought, yeah, it's a pretty good excuse. I'm gonna let that slide. And scheduled another interview. And now she's one of the best PAs that I've had. So my little bit of advice would be to be flexible. And if there's something in your gut that says, I want to give this person a chance, or I don't want to give this person a chance, is listen to that. Because something in me made me message her, and then it turned out to be a really good working relationship. Do you guys have any fun stories that you want to end on?
that's quite a nice positive way to.
Should I go first? Okay.
Yeah, go
Sure.
for it.
Yeah, okay. So I was going to tell you about one of my carers that on their first shadow shift threw up all the way down the stairs.
Oh,
Which was a funny story, and she actually came back to give her dues. But yeah, I've heard all sorts. But
What?
no,
She throw up.
I don't know. She projectile vomited down the stairs all over our Christmas tree, which was nice. And then at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Okay, that's quite worrying. Jack, what's your hopefully not scary story?
Mine, I don't really have. I don't think I've got any, unfortunately. I think I've. I mean,
Well,
my experience has been positive, but nothing super quirky, really.
That's good though. I mean, you don't want like too many crazy stories. I think, Becca, maybe that says something about you and me. Don't we have all of this?
Wait, can I just end on a nice one?
Go for it.
So one of my carers, she worked with me since I was 5, and she left 12 years later when I went to university. She saw me grow up. She saw my brother and my sister being born, and I saw her have her own husband, and she gave birth to 3 kids. And each time after maternity leave, she came back. And yeah, she left for uni, but you know, like we're lifelong friends. And yeah, like, you can't really form like a great relationship with carers. And they do, a lot of them end up being a massive part of your life. So I think it's important to have those boundaries there, but equally, yeah, kind of embrace it and make the most of it, because you could meet amazing people through it.
What a lovely positive note.
Yes, I agree. I've been to one of my carers' weddings,
Oh,
so that shows oneness. Yeah.
So I think unless there's anything else you two want to add, I think that's a pretty good place to tie off the session.
yeah. Yes.
Agreed.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for joining us and sharing your experiences of having PAs. And yeah, hopefully people have learned something and yeah, will hopefully make that step towards becoming as independent as they want to be.